to start the first part of perceiving music. I have now taught the psychology of music a number of times. It is one of my favorite classes to teach, and we often, or many of the textbooks, start out with these definitions of music. So I've taken a few of those, as your author hasn't come down on hard on a definition. In 1947, Random House said that music can be defined as an art of sound that expresses thoughts and feelings through elements of melody, harmony, and rhythm. So this is considered to be a pretty ethnocentric definition of music, especially that elements of melody, harmony, and rhythm, as not every culture's music uses all of those elements. I feel like an and/or would help a lot there. But one of the reactions to this was the Oxford Universal Dictionary in 1955, defining music as an art of combining sounds with a view to achieving beauty of form and the expression of thought and feeling. And this is a lot better, but when you put in that with a view to achieving beauty of form, it's again relatively ethnocentric, as there are many cultures who create music through, and a lot of times it is this kind of drumming, where the drums will be overlaid on each other, and it's really a way to create this kind of, oftentimes it's ritualistic, or it's to have a sense of bonding with the people around you, that they are playing this. And it's not about necessarily achieving beauty of form or creating some art. So still a little bit on the Western ethnocentric side. American Heritage Dictionary at some point had the definition arrangements of sound in time, or sounds in time. And now we're losing a lot of the definitional quality that would be descriptive of what music is, but it is, I actually kind of like that definition to some extent. And then at some point your author had this definition of organized sound. I don't think I remember reading this in the last edition, but organized sound, and at the time that he first put this in, he said that actually that describes a lawnmower, right? That describes the donkey braying and the dogs barking. That sound being organized is not definitional at all. So it isn't the easiest thing to define. I've definitely had students work on creating this definition, and it is tricky. Leonard Meyer was an early researcher, and he wrote a book called Emotion and Meaning in Music, and it's gotten a lot of it's gotten a lot of attention throughout the years. And he talks about music as being a form of emotional communication, which we might think it is a way of communicating emotion without the kind of semantics and the pieces and parts of what we have for language, the thoughts and the upper, higher level kind of, I'll just stick with semantics, but that is certainly possible of part of what music is. And Edgar Varese, I like this one a lot, which is why I stole this from Wikipedia, says that it's an art form and cultural activity whose medium is sound organized in time. And again, if I especially think this would be good if we changed that and to an and or. It can be an art form and or a cultural activity whose medium is sound organized in time. I like that one. I like that one a lot. As we attempt to be less ethnocentric, less based on Western conceptions of music, across cultures, it looks like music is used for many different things. It can be used for aesthetic enjoyment, so this kind of art form. It can be used for emotional communication. It can be used to obtain some kind of physical response, either from yourself as the musician or from people listening to your music. A lot of us listen to fast-paced music when we're exercising or running or whatever. I was always a runner who listened to music. Social conformity, symbolic representation, lots of religious rituals. I kind of brought that up before. It's very often used in religious rituals, validation of social institutions, and just group bonding, which group bonding is one of my kind of favorite uses to talk about and to think about, that when we are creating music together, we are bonding with each other. And even when we're listening to music together, it can create this sense of bonding. Authors have a section asking, does music have an adaptive function? And we come, of course, to Charles Darwin and this idea of natural selection, or really that all of the characteristics of an organism have some kind of functional significance, that they allowed us some specific function or adaptation that allowed for then this natural selection, where any traits that increase an animal's likelihood to survive and to reproduce are going to gradually become more prevalent in the population. So that's natural selection for particular traits or particular genetics. If I possibly can, and we went through objects and scenes, and you saw I have pictures of butterflies. If I ever possibly can, I always include pictures of butterflies because butterflies make me happy. So the owl butterfly is an excellent example of this kind of natural selection for things that are functionally significant, or for characteristics that are functionally significant. And for a lot of animals, we talk about something that is very physical, like the coloring on this butterfly camouflages it. It usually sits on things like a tree bark, and so it's nicely camouflaged and isn't seen by predatory birds. And then if a bird or something predatory gets close enough, the owl butterfly opens up its wings, and you can see the little owlets, or those what look like owl eyes, make it look like a large predatory bird, and so it tends to scare off other animals. Here's this big movement, and then they see these eyes. And so butterflies with their physical characteristics, if we look at the viceroy butterfly and how it looks like the monarch butterfly, which animals avoid because it's poisonous, that specific patterning on the wings, right, became more and more like the monarch butterfly because it gave the viceroy butterfly an evolutionary advantage. And so for animals, for butterflies, we might talk about these really physical characteristics. And with humans, of course, the brain, we've talked about the mind-body problem, the brain is the physical characteristics, right? So what aspects of the evolution of our brain give us music, and was the creation of music, our ability to create music, adaptive for us, functionally significant somehow. Adaptationist accounts of the origins of music, or why we have music, relate both to survival as well as to sexual reproduction. There are different ideas of or theories of how and why we have music. For survival, it might be something like moving in a group, working with a group, social bonding, those things that allowed for our kind of group cohesion. There's also some suggestion that it could be important for sexual reproduction, as people who sing or play music tend to be noticed. They tend to be attractive to other people. People think they're brave or whatever. So there are lots of different ideas of or theories of the adaptationist accounts of why music might have been adaptive, and we see it through natural selection, or through this kind of adaptive account. Non-adaptationist accounts also exist for the origin of music. So, and the most popular or common one I've seen is that it could be this idea of an exaptation, that we had these traits that perform different functions, but then we can see changes in the phenotype, or what we see in behaviors, that are not necessarily changing genetics, right? And so they often come up with the idea of aspects of language overlap a lot with aspects of music, and there's even one specific non-adaptationist account that talks about this kind of proto-language, that we had a proto-language of some semantics and some of these more intonational or emotional contours, and that has come into a much more semantic language where we can speak with these meanings to words versus a more musical language, which has more of the aspects of the emotion, just the emotional contours and pitch changes and things like that. So could be an exaptation, could be an interaction between several qualities that we see, like so that relate to other things in addition to maybe language. So rhythm, tempo, grouping, melody, harmony, and timbre. And I have addressed some of those in my discussion of language, but could be some interaction that we see all of these different things, and they came together nicely for music. So I gave some definitions before, and I complained about them all. And so my green questions are for you to stop and think about, and I think it's a good thing to think about. What is music, or how we might explain music to someone who has never experienced music? And I would say, I would guess, you know, an alien species or something, because even communicating with a deaf person, we can feel music, right? One of my favorite things is being in a concert and feeling the music up in my feet and through my organs. I love that feeling. So someone who has truly never experienced music, how would we explain music to them? Take that pause. I'm encouraging you to pause things. It's not easy, right? We can go back and forth between this. Well, we're either not informative and just saying organized sounds, or we're being informative and we're either being very saying overarching things that maybe don't apply to all music, or we're getting not very parsimonious in this long descriptions of the, well, it can be used for this or this, it could do that or this, it has rhythm, or, you know, so and all. So it gets tricky and complicated, but it's a good thing to think about how you might explain that to someone or describe to someone. We might include some specific properties to try to describe music, but which of these are meaningful, which of them are truly have to be part of music, versus also how meaningful are these properties to someone who hasn't experienced music. So we can talk about pitch changes, and I've talked about pitch as being low pitched or high pitched, right? So we can change our pitch and kind of describe that to someone, and we can describe how pitch, if we have a sequence of pitches that are perceived as belonging together, that's going to give us a melody. We can talk about the temporal structure of music. So that temporal is always talking about time, right? So that we are organizing information or sounds through time, and that so we are organized. Music organizes time for us. We might talk about time dimensions where regular beats are organized into measures, and then there's a time pattern created by the notes within that, which gives us our rhythm. So we might use those specific words for music, but without the kind of description of them. Again, we can't just say, well, it has beats and rhythm and melody, because those things aren't meaningful to somebody who hasn't experienced music. I have a few more here. Other aspects of music, so we've talked about timbre quite a bit, that quality of sound that comes from a particular instrument, that as we play these complex tones, each of those instruments has their own harmonics or overtones in addition to that fundamental frequency, and those different amplitudes of those harmonics, those different frequencies that are multiples of our fundamental, that gives us that timbre or quality. We have the harmony, which is the quality of sound when two or more pitches are played together at the same time, or two people are singing, or two people, so we have a do and a mi. And the idea of harmony, that we're playing these two sounds or two or more pitches at the same time, and we have a certain quality to it, leads to consonance, so things that people call harmonically pleasing, versus dissonance. Generally, people describe this as displeasing. We do have a little bit more dissonance in our music as the decades have passed since the blues and rock and roll came around, and so even more, I think, from what one of my students did a really neat project showing just there are more and more dissonant sounds in music now than there used to be. But to get this idea of consonance and dissonance, so I'm going to have my little keyboard here, which I'll be honest, my keyboard does not have, to me, a particularly pleasing timbre. It has a sound that is, it's okay. But then we're putting these together. If I put together the two C's, it has this consonance, right? And I mentioned that doubling, because we're doubling that frequency, that those C's are sharing a lot of their harmonics. Well, I'm still sharing more harmonics than with other notes if I play a major third, which is often described as consonant, or a major fifth, which is also described as consonant, and then the next one we like down is the perfect fourth. A little bit less if I get into things like the seventh. We're getting into some dissonance. Less pleasing, the second. Less pleasing, a minor third. We have some a perfect fourth. This is my favorite. It's called the devil's chord. Okay, so you get the picture, and most of us would say those last ones were a little less pleasing. They were actually a little displeasing, or caused a little tension. A lot of times music uses this, so we hear something a little bit displeasing and we want to go back to C, or something really consonant, or something really pleasant. This seems like a good place to pause, but I will just end up here with, as we're including these specific properties to try to describe music, maybe to someone who's never experienced music before, we might ask which of these are meaningful, how meaningful some of these can be to someone who hasn't experienced music. I think pitch, timbre, temporal structure, that those make a lot of sense, because I can change my pitch. I can talk about different people's voices as having different timbres. I can talk about structure and time, but the rest of those, we almost have to use those in that what seems familiar and describe those in order for them to be descriptive or helpful in describing music. So it is pretty tricky to come up with a definition of music, or really a description of music that would be helpful to somebody who doesn't know, who wouldn't know what it is.